Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 363. This podcast is brought to you by Synovitin OA. Hey dog lovers, is your furry friend limping or struggling to enjoy agility like they used to? It might be osteoarthritis, OA, a common source of pain and mobility issues in dogs that's driven by inflammation in their joints. Inflammation is the silent enemy, not only causing pain, but also accelerating the progression of OA. Synovitin OA is a groundbreaking one-time injection into the arthritic joint that targets the very cells causing the pain and inflammation. By eliminating these harmful cells, Synovitin OA breaks the cycle of inflammation, offering relief right where it's needed most. Don't let your dog suffer from the pain of arthritis. Visit activedognow.com to learn more about Synovitin OA and give your dog the gift of long-lasting pain-free movement. Studied in canine elbows, Synovitin OA is given by authorized veterinarians. Temporary discomfort in the treated joints may occur. Talk to a treating veterinarian near you for more information and visit activedognow.com. Today, we're joined by Dr. Arielle Pechette Markley, who is part of the Canine Sports Science Consortium. And they recently made an announcement, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, actually, that they are putting together a study on the dog walk in coordination with a massive number of agility organizations. So it includes the American Kennel Club, AKC, the Australian Shepherd Club of America, ASCA, the Canine Performance Event, CPE, the FCI, the North American Dog Agility Council, NADAC, the Royal Kennel Club, RKC, the UK Agility International, UKI, and the United States Dog Agility Association, USDAA. So I think one of the craziest things about this announcement is really getting all of those players, which essentially includes pretty much every organization in the United States, and then adding to that kind of the premier organization of Europe, FCI, and getting them all together on one page to talk about this. So, Arielle, I guess just tell us a little bit about what you're planning, how like what happened behind the scenes to get so many different organizations on board. I guess before I unleash you, I'll go back one step for anybody who has not been following along. We have a previous podcast where we talked about dog walk safety specifically. And there was a video that kind of went viral where a equipment manufacturer actually created a wider dog walk and then ran dogs on the normal dog walk and the wider dog walk. And it really kind of, these conversations have been happening for years, but it really kind of brought that conversation into kind of the spotlight where everybody was talking about it and everybody, had opinions on what should be done. And one of the things that came out of that was, a desire for more information, more data, in order to really consider making any equipment changes to the sport of agility. So that's kind of the background, and I'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes page. But before we jump into the things that you're looking at, Arielle, in terms of like putting together a study and stuff like that, can you give us just kind of a background on you and what kind of doctor are you and what kind of dogs do you have and how are you related to agility for those who don't know you?
Yeah, so I'm a board certified sports medicine specialist. So my practice is just like sports medicine and rehabilitation, primarily sporting and working dogs. And my background actually kind of came for agility, came when I kind of started doing sports medicine and rehab. I started seeing agility patients, and I would get a lot of questions about, hey, when is it safe to do this? What do you think about the safety of this surface? And my answer was always, we don't know. We don't have any studies. And so after, feeling like I was an idiot all the time, having no answers for people, I was like, well, maybe I should do some research. And so one of my clients at the time was a biostatistician at The Ohio State University, which is where I was working at that point. And she and I were chatting and we're like, well, we could design a study. And so we started out, fairly basic and did a survey on injuries, essentially in agility dogs. Common types of injuries, common locations of injuries, risk factors for injuries. And we had almost 5,000 people fill out the survey. So it ended up being pretty large. And so from there, we kind of kept that going and started doing like more and more studies. And then we kind of expanded our collaboration to a group of kind of multidisciplinary groups. So we did a grant proposal to design a custom wearable sensor for agility dogs that could detect specific agility activities and then pair that with an app. And so as part of that research proposal, we brought in a whole team of computer scientists at Georgia Tech, led by Dr. Melody Moore Jackson, a biomechanics specialist, Rachel Olson at University of Akron. And so it kind of became this whole like research team. And we did a bunch of research on developing this wearable technology. And then the projects kind of expanded from there. And obviously you were able to come up for some of our studies. So we did a weave biomechanics study, and then we did that like Agile Cup to kind of validate that wearable technology on a full agility course. So we've been doing, research kind of over the years. And it's been really cool to see how those projects have expanded, how our research collaboration has expanded, and really the interest in the agility community. So that's my kind of working and research background. I have a border collie. His name is Jax. We do a little bit of agility, but my work and research have kept me pretty busy recently. So, and I also just recently moved to Colorado, so haven't quite picked it back up since the move.
All right. And so then kind of bring us up to speed, I guess, on the background of how you've been involved in things since kind of the momentum got picked up with this dog walk video that went viral.
Yeah. So there were multiple organizations that kind of by themselves wanted to start kind of evaluating incidents within their kind of own organizations and their own trials. And Greg Darrett from UKI, we've worked with for some research projects in the past. And so we started chatting about, whether we could just develop a more formal kind of data collection method for him, since he had already kind of developed something himself for the judges to use. And then it kind of just grew from there. We had other organizations that were like, oh, we want to do that too. We want to be involved. And then it was just another organization after another organization. And so that was really exciting to see everybody kind of come together and say, hey, we want this research, like we want to do it together. We want this data. And so from there, it became, a discussion about what data do we collect, how is best to collect it. And it started with the dog walk, but we ended up deciding that we wanted to collect more than just the dog walk, just to give more of a perspective, because if we only collect data on the dog walk alone, but we don't have any comparison to how that relates to other incidents on the agility course, it's kind of an isolated piece of data. It's helpful, but maybe not as helpful as having a bigger picture. And so then we were like, okay, well, do we want to try to collect data on all incidents on course, including jumps and tunnels and slips on the surface? But we realized that would be a huge burden for the judges, because we're relying on the judges to remember the incidents and then basically write up a little, report about it. We have kind of an automated online survey for it, but that's still a lot. Plus, they're going to miss things, especially, a potential slip on the surface or a delayed tunnel exit or things like that may not be as obvious. And so we decided that we would focus for this particular study on the 3 contact obstacles. So dog walk, A-frame, and teeter. And we decided that primarily because the incidents related to those obstacles are probably there's not a huge number of them. So the judges don't have as many things to remember and report. And the incidents related to them tend to be a little bit more obvious. Obviously, falls are quite more, a bit more obvious than maybe a little bit of a slip on turf when taking a jump turn. So we figured this was a good start. And I think, all of the organizations are hoping that this is basically just a start. So we're going to do this study. And then if everything goes well and we get really good feedback and the judges don't seem, overwhelmed by everything, that maybe then we would do another study looking at another subset of obstacles. And so I'm hoping this is just the start to it. But we basically had a bunch of meetings, went back and forth, decided what kind of information we were going to ask. And how to ask it, because once again, the judges are the ones who are going to have to do a lot of this work, and they already have a huge job of doing, the judging. And so what we ended up deciding was that we were going to do kind of 2 separate surveys. So there's an incident reporting survey that we hope the judge will fill out as close to the actual incident as possible. And it's basically just gathering information about, which obstacle was involved, some information about like where on the obstacle it happened. So did it, if it was the dog walk, did it happen on the, up ramp, or did it happen on the exit, or some details like that. And then, we decided that we would have kind of an end of trial survey. And that could be filled out by the judge or the, organizing, the host or the trial secretary or somebody involved with the trial. And that information would have more total trial information. So that would have like surface, manufacturer for the equipment, the things that are fairly consistent across the trial. That way the judge didn't have to fill that kind of information out because it doesn't necessarily change. And then the other big piece of this information is at the end of the trial survey, the total number of runs that include the contact obstacles. Because if we find, if the judge fills out 2 incident surveys, one for the A-frame and one for the dog walk, and we don't know how many total runs there were, that's not a great, idea of what the risk of it is, because that's very different if there's only 100 runs versus 600 runs. So we're gathering kind of end of trial data, how many, standard runs were there, how many games runs were there, to give us a better idea of like actual risk of incident.
And so then what is kind of the time frame that y'all are looking at for, I guess, phase 1 or whatever? And then once you have that data, like what happens next?
Yeah. So we're going to collect data for 6 months. Most of the organizations are planning on starting that data collection this week or next week. So pretty quickly. And then 6 months of data collection, we decided that would give a pretty good number of trials, especially since it's, spring, summer. And so a lot more trials are happening. And then at the end, that's where my magical biostatistician, Abby, will come in and pull all of that data, on the back end and basically analyze it. So looking at what that, the total number of incidents related to the different obstacles in relation to the total number of runs. So we can actually have a, dog walk, A-frame, and teeter kind of incident per 100 runs. And then, I think that the harder thing is going to be potentially, and I think what people really want is what are the risks, like what risk factors there are. So is there a surface issue or, course design or these things that are really hard to assess in this type of study? And we will do some preliminary kind of analysis of those other kind of reported factors like manufacturer and surface, and whether the judge thought that maybe there was a issue with a tunnel dog walk discrimination. And so we'll look at some of those things. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to make very solid conclusions because those kind of things are hard to study in kind of a survey type environment. But we will look at them.
You may have already mentioned in your laundry list of things that you are going to be doing, but are you also going to look at exits and entries for dog walks, like angles, like pairing incident reports with, say, a course map of the run, that sort of thing? Because I think that's where so many competitors are really hung up on that,
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a big potential issue. The problem with that is trying to evaluate that in this kind of survey setting, because we can ask on the incident survey about, what, entry, angle, or what the obstacle before was, like what's the approach, what's the exit. But once again, if you don't have kind of a denominator for that, if you don't have a comparison to all of the course design elements that didn't have an incident, then it's not great data. So if you have an incident where you have kind of a tight turn off of a jump before the dog walk, you say, oh no, like you can't do that. Like that's going to be, an issue. But you don't know how many courses had that exact same design element that didn't have an incident. So in order to evaluate that, you would have to have the course design for all of the courses that had incidents in comparison to all of the courses that didn't have incidents. And so you can imagine over a 6-month period of time, having to evaluate course maps for every single course, for every single trial, and comparing them to the ones that had incidents versus that didn't. And that's a huge amount of manpower. So we decided to not do that now. However, the kind of cool thing is my colleagues at Georgia Tech are working on a really cool, like they developed a software that can use basically AI to read course maps.
That's going to be my very next question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is actually it's in development. It's really cool. So that it's actually really accurate at being able to evaluate the course maps, being able to pinpoint the different obstacles, and potentially even like giving an estimate of the dog's approach angle. Obviously that varies based on handling, but it can at least kind of estimate what that dog's line is going to be. And so I think that down the road, once this is actually like a really good, like solid, software, we can potentially look at that. So we can run every single course map through this program and be able to then correlate it with, incidents. But like right now for this next 6 months, it's not quite there yet.
That is super interesting. I had this random thought that popped in my head, and it was, what if we looked at all the data and it turns out straight exits and straight approaches have a higher incidence of falls than having to turn from an obstacle previously.
Well, I think the question that I have is that, so I feel like this, getting all the players together, getting the survey going, it definitely was, in my opinion, a reaction to all the discussion that was happening about the dog walk. And then it kind of got a little bit broadened from there, right? So at the end of this, are you and your team part of any discussion about what to do about this, or like with the data that you have? Or are they like, thank you for your service, give us the numbers, and now we will go and, decide what we want to, do about it?
Oh, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. No, I mean, I think that, we will give them all of the, data and information. I think, depending on what we find, there probably should be a discussion about then what do we do next? Because for anybody who's been involved in research, often what happens in research once you have data is you end up with more research questions.
Right.
And so most of the time it's not a definitive like, ta-da, here's your, answer. It's more like, oh, look, we found this, this, and this. So this might be a risk factor. Like what, if if it's run on sand and maybe the sand's getting tracked onto the contact obstacles and it's causing slipping, maybe we should look at surface effects. And so I think that while we will have, potentially information to make some decisions, I think a lot of it's going to end up leading to potentially basis for more studies. And that information will basically tell us like, what do we need to study next?
Right. And it's a great start, but like as far as changes to the dog walk are concerned, which again was kind of the what kickstarted it, the question was, do we potentially lower the dog walk, and do we potentially widen the dog walk? Mm-hmm. And so, how can your study really inform that decision at all, since it's all on the dog walk as it currently exists? Like, what discussions have you been a part of how this might relate to a case for or against changing any aspect of the dog walk?
Yeah, so ultimately, it doesn't really necessarily inform that change. Basically, what we're looking for is trying to figure out a true like incident rate associated with the dog walk. Because if we make a change, we need to have some background on what that change is doing. So if we have a certain number of incidents on the dog walk, say, 3 per 1,000 dog walk runs, and then we make a change, we want to know then what the incident rate is with the change. Because if we don't have that initial incident rate and we just make a change and then we have a certain number of falls, we're like, well, did it make it better or did it make it worse, or is it exactly the same? So we need that kind of background before we can evaluate any changes and what those changes are doing.
So does that mean if they're doing this now that they are, as a group, potentially discussing making the same change as a group and then doing another study after?
I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. I think that they really want to know kind of what's going on first before making any decisions. But there has been discussion about making changes, and like FCI has a working group specifically for the dog walk. So every organization is kind of discussing it. And kind of within our research group, the benefit of having a kind of multidisciplinary team, including, biomechanics specialists, is we are planning on looking at the biomechanics of the kind of standard dog walk, but also the biomechanics of the dog walk with it being lower or wider. And so we're working on developing force plates that can actually be integrated into the equipment itself. So that way we can evaluate kind of the forces and kind of the center of pressure, because a lot of times what you'll notice is a change in that center of pressure and kind of the balance of the dog before you actually have an incident. So we'll be able to catch really minute changes with those force plates that you wouldn't even potentially see visually with a video. So that is in kind of the works of developing those and being able to completely instrument the obstacles, so that way we can look at kind of those movement changes with different kind of changes in the equipment itself. Yeah, I mean, and there's also been discussion about like the different dog walk manufacturing lines, about like the springiness of like the soft lines and whether that's related to more incidents. So that's something we'll be asking about, with regards to the equipment. And yeah, the variation within FCI did create a little bit of a challenge when developing this survey, because there are so many variations in regards to, even just jump heights. And so we're asking about, what the jump height is for the dog that has an incident. And, in most, in the US, it's kind of very standardized, but, FCI kind of has general rules, but then some of the countries have additional heights, or they're allowed to have some variation within like a height range. So trying to figure out how to build that into the survey was a little bit challenging.
So you have different surveys. Like I assume you have like one core or standard survey, and then you've made modifications for each organization as needed?
So it was. I am hugely appreciative of the fact that there are so many organizations involved, but every organization has slightly different rules, slightly different specifications for things. NADAC doesn't have a teeter, so the core survey is the same, but we did have to make some modifications for each organization. So essentially, the first question that will pop up on the survey is, what organization are you reporting for? And then based on what they select, the questions that they receive are going to be slightly different. Because we're asking about the competition level. And so different organizations have different, levels or numbers of levels, and then specifications regarding the equipment and things like that.
Okay. I have a perhaps unrelated question, but how does funding work? Because this sounds like a lot of work. You're pulling in a lot of experts with a lot of expertise working across many organizations. It seems like a tremendous amount of data that's going to be coming your way. So how do you all get paid for this? Where do you get the resources? How does that work?
We don't get paid for this.
Wow.
This is all volunteer based. So while we would love to have funding, at this point, we don't. And we made the decision too for this particular study. And to be fair, so we've had funding for some of our other studies. So for our Weave biomechanics study, that was partially funded by the American Association of Rehab Vets. And then the AKC Canine Health Foundation, which is related but separate from the AKC itself, funded our wearable technology development project, our Agile project. So we've had funding for projects in the past, but it's been pretty small, not very significant funding, and it hasn't even really covered all of our costs and everything. But for this project, we don't have any, and we specifically made the decision that we didn't want any of the organizations themselves to fund this project because we didn't want to introduce any potential or appearance of bias or conflict of interest. We wanted to very much remain independent of any of the organizations. And so I would happily accept funding if somebody wanted to fund this project outside of the organizations. We did set up on our website a donation link that, for basically crowdfunding purposes, because yes, the amount of data that's going to have to be processed on the back end is going to be significant. We're going to probably have to have multiple students helping Abby with that, because, she still hasn't figured out how to clone herself. So yeah, it'll just be us and some students that we con into helping us.
That is awesome and daunting, and I feel like highly ethical as far as the scientific method there. I like that.
I think it's also a really cool aspect of agility that agility people are so passionate about the sport that they're willing to put in the expertise that they have. And I feel like people may not realize how lucky we are as a sport that just randomly that, the head of computer science at Georgia Tech Melody Moore Jackson, right, is also an agility person. And so in the same way that like I love agility and, I, spend my time as a software programmer, like coding up things to put together the Bad Dog Power Score or, things like that. And so you kind of take your expertise, and if you find a way to make it work towards your passion of agility, you do it. And so we wouldn't have any of this if it wasn't just coincidentally that Melody Moore Jackson does agility and also is in charge of a whole bunch of computer programmers and has made this a large part of what she's interested in as an academic and on the wearable side, right? And then, you mentioned Abby, that's Abby Shoben being your statistician. Also an agility person who happens to also be a PhD in statistics and was like, hey, like I like statistics and I like numbers. She and I have talked many times because of all the statistical work that we do at Bad Dog Agility. And we've actually provided, you and your team and Abby, data to help further things where we can. So it's kind of like everybody in the agility community is taking all of the skills that they have that aren't dog training skills at all and have really nothing to do with our dogs, but using it to further the sport. And so I just think that's kind of a really cool coming together of everybody's skills.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And that's how we all kind of came together as a team is I, had this kind of idea about wearable, like using a wearable to evaluate performance and potentially injuries. And clearly I am like the least like techie person. And so I was like, well, that is far beyond my area of expertise. And I don't even know where to start. And so I started like looking at the literature and I was like, okay, like what can I learn? And I saw this name keep popping up, Melody Moore Jackson. I was like, oh, I recognize that name. I was like, I've talked to her on Facebook before. And so I reached out to her and I was like, hey, what do you think about doing some research together on this? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And then Rachel Olson at the University of Akron, we also kind of connected randomly on Facebook, talking about some, agility biomechanics stuff. And I was like, hey, do you want to be involved? And so it was kind of this community network of sport enthusiasts that also had backgrounds in research and really wanted to study this. And, luckily for them, they have other sources of funding for other projects. And I mean, hopefully at some point, this will become, big enough that we can also have, larger funding for agility specific studies. And then even beyond there, I mean, a lot of what we're working on, while obviously we're talking about agility and the, listeners are agility enthusiasts, what we're doing is potentially applicable to other sports, especially like the wearable technology. We will potentially be able to use it in other sports, potentially use it in working dogs, search and rescue dogs, military working dogs. And so it has a huge application beyond the sport of agility. But where our focus, has been and will continue to be for now is agility related.
And so kind of as we wrap up the podcast, it sounds like this project is largely happening through the organizations and the judges. What can the listeners or what can, the dog agility community, what can they do to help, you in any way further, this goal of continuing research, figuring out safety, and potentially influencing changes at the organizational level?
Yeah, so I think for this particular study, many of the organizations are not making it mandatory for their judges to report. So I think that having competitors invested in this and like encouraging their trial judges and organizing members to really get involved in making sure that, this is actually happening, that these surveys are getting filled out. And also, being patient because if the judge is filling out multiple surveys, the trial, there could be some mild like delays. So being understanding of that and being encouraging of the collection of data, within the trial setting. Then we will also, for people who are, want to themselves be involved in data collection, we are also working with another collaborator on developing like a handler reporting database for incidents and injuries. So that should be coming out potentially in the next couple of weeks. So potentially, that'll be nicely correlated with the incidents from the judges. And then, just getting involved in supporting, research. We haven't really had any issues when we have kind of data collection events like the, trial that we did for the wearables or the biomechanics studies. Like people have been readily signing up and participating, but, definitely, participate if we have data collection events or other organizations have data collection events. And then, if people want to donate to the research, like that would be much appreciated as well, because that definitely helps us be able to do more and more projects, involve, more students, have more statistical staff and things like that.
Perfect. So I will make sure to put a link to the website on the show notes page. That's for caninesportsscience.org, which is the Canine Sports Science Consortium website. And on there is a link to donate. Just, I guess, to clarify for people, it looks like right now, the donations are not tax deductible because your organization is so new that you don't yet have that status like established. But people can also donate tax deductible directly to the universities and just earmark the funds. Is that right?
Yes. So Georgia Tech and University of Akron both have their own like research funds. And they're not necessarily specific for the agility projects, but if you basically comment and earmark it, they can kind of make sure it goes in that direction. But that's a tax deductible option for those that's really needed.
And I assume that once you get your nonprofit status that you'll update the webpage. So if people are listening to this later and they go to the donate page and it says that it's tax deductible, then it's tax deductible.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We are just starting that process of all the nonprofit.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Fascinating to hear what's going on, and we will be sure to, check back with you as things move along and see what the updates are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in 6 months, we're going to have potentially, 1 million runs worth of data to slog through. So hopefully we'll have some good updates after that.
Awesome. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Synoviton OA and hititboard.com. Check out the Teeter Teach It, only at hititboard.com. The Teeter Teach It is an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Happy training!
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.